Hi, my name is Lorraine Warren, and the name of my talk is Restoring Small Towns in Rural New Zealand. I was an academic in the UK for many years at Southampton University, and I went to New Zealand, to quite a rural area, Palmerston North in New Zealand, to take up a professorship in innovation and entrepreneurship. And I've been working for many years on the topic of entrepreneurial identity in the business school at Southampton. I was very much interested in how entrepreneurs crafted an entrepreneurial identity, how it was a social construction, how it was very much a story about themselves that they co-created with others, and how it was very important that they had that in terms of legitimizing their whole existence of entrepreneurship, as it were. Now, when I went to New Zealand, my interest spread out a bit. Became very interested in how small towns in New Zealand had to tell stories about themselves to survive. And that's what I want to focus on in this talk. So I'll just get the share screen going here, hopefully. Come along. There we go. Okay, so presents. Great. Okay, so I think when I first went to New Zealand, like many people, I had some tourist experiences that were focused on towns that were very prosperous, that were connected to some means of economic production. In this case, I've just highlighted the Marlborough wine train, for example, where towns connect to each other to tell stories of how wine was produced, how individual estates evolved, what a great deal New Zealand wine was. And the government had put a lot of money into these towns to kind of bring New Zealand wine from being something that was seen as poor quality and a bit naff into really a world-beating product that was connected with very high quality and upmarket tourist experiences in New Zealand. So you would go, you would have a great time, you'd be served lovely food, you'd be told these great stories by lovely people, and you would buy and taste and then buy, hopefully, some very high quality wine. So that's a kind of regional development aspect where towns talk about themselves in relation to something and in relation to other towns. And it's successful, it's part of economic growth. Great, that's good. Now, as I mentioned, Palmerston North is in the rural area of the North Island, and I began to look around me after I've been there a few weeks, and I was seeing towns like this. This is Woodville, which is a town about 10 minutes drive from Palmerston North, and it was far less prosperous looking than the more touristy areas that I'd seen, and I was quite shocked actually by the appearance of some of the towns that I saw. They looked very poor. They had this almost like Wild West appearance with this high kind of frontispiece to the building, wooden buildings typically, and you went in and sometimes the shops felt very damp and that kind of thing. And I began to pick up on the notion that many of these towns had been set up around a primary industries kind of endeavor, like a logging plant, a meat packing plant. In this case, Woodville had been set up around a crossroads between two mountain ranges, the Tararuas and the Ruinis. And there was a story going around promulgated by Shamobile Equab here that these were actually zombie towns if the original reason for their being there had gone. And I began to hear this story about Woodville, this town here, during the time just during the time that I was there, the gorge that supported it being a crossroads became closed by landslides, and people would say, well, you know, why do we even do this? You know, why should we bother supporting this town? And you know, it kind of shocked me how ephemeral and fragile the towns actually were. There were more positive voices, like Spoonley, for example, from Massey University, said, you know, this is about rebooting small towns, not obliterating them, and that's really what we need to do in the regions. Again, this is just another picture. This was taken from Stratford, from some other work I was doing about vestiges of colonialism in New Zealand small towns. And you know, again, you've got this kind of image almost of colonial decline here, where you can imagine an Empire Hotel was a massive focal point, almost like a station hotel, you know, kind of thing in an emerging town. And then it's gotten a bit shabby and a bit sad, and you know, there is this decline going on. So some of the small towns had decided to restory themselves, if you like, and many of them had picked up on this idea of linking themselves with some local means of production, and you know, making themselves the town of carrot production, or the town of gumboot production, or the town of trout fishing, or something like that. And this is Ohakune, and they have this famous picture, this famous sculpture, I'm not sure what you call it, of the Ohakune carrot, and this would be a focus then for Ohakune, which of course was not the only carrot producing place in New Zealand, but it would be something that they could focus on, and they would have festivals and carrots and that kind of, festivals and carnivals focused on the carrot, and that was kind of what he did, and that would bring money in, and it was you know, quite a cozy small town thing to do. There's another one here, that's the Ekatahuna kiwi, which I must confess I found quite frightening when I first drove past it. I almost sort of had a car accident. It gave me quite a shock. It's quite a huge thing. And but that's there is a place near to Ekatahuna, which has kiwis and looks after kiwis and supports kiwis in the wild. And they have a white kiwi, which is why it's that kind of colour. But it's just an interesting point about Ekatahuna is that it was hit by an earthquake in the last decade, and many of the buildings were severely damaged by that. And that's another aspect of why the very survival of some towns is becoming is such a talking point, because the towns don't just have wooden buildings and that kind of Wild West frontier appearance. They do also have some quite big stone buildings that were often put up like around the main street of the town. The sort of prestige buildings, if you like, around the post office or the bank, things that say, you know, we are a town. These are often stone built or concrete built or something like that. And they're just not very robust in terms of their resistance to earthquakes, which are a common feature of New Zealand life. I was there 4 years and experienced 3 that were about a 6 magnitude that, you know, damaged some buildings in town and shook me in my bed. And you know, it's a real live thing. We tend to hear about the big ones in Wellington or Christchurch, but it's going on quite a lot elsewhere too, constantly. Now, so there we have then, I've described there how towns have align themselves with some local icon of production, or some local aspect that can attract tourism, like the Kiwi Sanctuary, like the Carrot, and there are many, many of these throughout New Zealand. Now, another town that was near Palmerston North was Shannon, and that took a different approach. I actually did some quite an extensive research project here, which I've published recently in the Journal of Small Business Management. And this is a town of about 600 people. And again, you can see it's got this passing through Wild West kind of look to it. There's a row of some quite battered and dilapidated wooden buildings there on the right. But you can see this antique centre here, which I think was a bank. That's got the classic stone grand building look to it that says, you know, we're a town and we're here. And it's a blighted building now because it's under strictures that it has to sort out its earthquake viability within the next, I think it's by 2024. And you know, how could you ever strengthen a building like that that's just a small antique and collectibles business and still be profitable? So again, you know, you've got this ephemerality coming through. Now, Shannon took a different approach. It was conscious of its history, and it did do some very interesting railway history, which is kind of over to the right. You can't see that in the picture. But what Shannon did, it aligned itself with a very vibrant entrepreneur, Susie Johnson, who came to Shannon there. And Joy says, I came to Shannon with $5 and a dream. And she built up quite a big business around this Oosh brand. And she designed and produced clothes in New Zealand for women. And she kind of storied herself as the champion of the struggling small town in New Zealand, the saviour of small towns in New Zealand. And she started off in Shannon, and that was like home base. But it wasn't long before she moved up to Napier for very much more upmarket shops, and that's where she centred most of her production. And she carried on with this strategy of 10 shops in 10 small towns and that kind of thing. But eventually she was overstretched, and she's just recently gone bust. Now, in many of the towns where she was, you know, it's kind of like, okay, it's another shop gone, we'll get another shop kind of thing. But Shannon has suffered from her associating her story with them, because, you know, that was such the start of a dream kind of alignment. And now that's gone, and she had 3 shops and a gallery there down that small main street, and they're now standing empty. So the restoring isn't always successful. So there are issues with restoring towns. Firstly, whose story is it? There are obviously, in any small town where you tried to do this, there would be factions, sort of, you know, why is it a carrot? Why is it not something else? Shannon had many people who wanted to align around other tourist attractions in the town and not be so heavily focused on Susie, for example. So a lot of tensions in the town about that. There's also questions over colonial domination in New Zealand, and the position of the Maori and their stories, Maori names and so on. And there has been some work done on that as to how these things get eliminated, and some stories persist and others don't. And as we've seen in the case of Susie, are the towns any less fragile Shannon had a real boost from Susie being there, but then if she goes, then what's left? So I hope you've enjoyed this. I think I've done my 10 minutes. So thank you for listening, and I hope we get some useful discussions out of this. Okay, thank you.